All right, let's start this off with what David Tunstall said on Twitter. Mike Trout will demand a trade by this offseason. Now, it feels like forever we've been talking about Mike Trout getting traded to another team because the Angels have stunk for a long time. They haven't made the postseason since 2014. People feel like his career is being wasted away with the Angels. Not only do people want to see this guy healthy and playing, they want him to be on a winning team. So I think the first question you got to ask is, will the Angels be competitive this year? Now, they did get off to a pretty good start. Hit a bit of a losing streak as of late. They did win their last game. Overall, they're 10-9. Now, I'm thinking about the Angels for the rest of this year. Will they be competitive enough? Now, let's take a look at the offense. As of right now, they rank 18th overall in offense, which combines WRC+. They're going to have to pick it up a little bit there. You got some guys that are off to some pretty good starts here. Kyron Paris has been amazing this year for the Angels, off to a great start in his career. Logan O'Hoppy's doing pretty well. Nolan Schanuel starting to do a bit more with the bat. Jorge Soler, he's giving you some power. And hey, Mike Trout, he's bringing some pop here in the early going. The batting average is a little low at 171. On base is only at 268, slugging at a 443. I think that the best number here is the 19 games played. He's healthy so far, so that's the most important thing. Now, they do have Zach Neto coming back soon, so that should help, but they're getting slow starts from Luis Rengifo, Joe Adell. Taylor Ward is hitting for a little bit of pop, but he needs to be a bit more consistent at the plate. Overall, though, I'm not too worried about the Angels' offense. Where I really worry about them is the pitching side of things. So taking a look at the starting pitching, they're 20th overall as of right now. Sure, ERA looks pretty good at a 3.88, but the FIP is worrying me at a 4.62. Now, you got a couple of guys, they're doing okay, right? Jose Soriano off to a decent start. Kikuchi doing okay so far. For the most part, these guys are doing all right. Jack Economix, he has been getting hit pretty hard. I just wonder, what's this starting pitching going to be looking like, by the halfway point of the year? And taking a look at where they rank with their bullpen, this is not very good. 25th overall, ERA at a 4.50, FIP at a 4.78. They're also giving up quite a few home runs. Sure, Kenley Jansen's off to a pretty good start, but, Ryan Zefferhan, Brock Burke, they're kind of just doing whatever at this point. Reed Detmers, his FIP is a full run higher than the ERA. Ryan Johnson, he got hit hard, a couple of outings there. So, I'm not sure about the overall pitching staff of the Angels right now. Sure, they're figuring it out. They're hanging around here in the early going, but what are they going to look like, when it comes June and July? I also worry about the organization depth a little bit. Do they have enough guys within the organization that could come up and help them? You got a couple of younger guys there. When it comes to Mike Trout, a possible trade, I think the next thing you got to ask is, well, is he going to be healthy? That's the big question. But, it's also the money, too. He's on a massive contract, a 12-year, $426.5 million deal. As you can see here on Baseball Trade Values, he's got a very underwater contract at this point, which means he's owed a lot of money, and the field value that he's projected to put up isn't matching what he's actually going to be getting paid. So you would have to probably, either take back a good amount of money or pay off a good amount of the contract to whatever team he's going to. The next question you got to ask is, which teams would be willing to take on the massive contract of Mike Trout? Now, the first team that pops up for a lot of people are the Philadelphia Phillies. He grew up a Phillies fan, and the Phillies, as of right now, I think you could use an improvement in the outfield, right? You got Nick Castellanos out and right. You got Max Kepler. You got Brandon Marsh out there. When it comes to Max Kepler, he's been pretty up and down over the last few years. Brandon Marsh is really just a platoon player. They do got the money. They got the ownership that really wants to win. So, could that be a possibility? Maybe. You got a team like the Giants. They've been looking to spend money here over the last few years. I'm looking at the outfield right now. Jung Lee's off to a great start this year. You got Elliot Ramos. You got Mike Yastrzemski. I could definitely see a situation here where Mike Trout could fit in, get some DH time as well, and he would stay in California, so it's not like he would be going too far. And, maybe a team like the Mets, if I'm looking at the current state of things, Jose Siri, he's got a fracture in his leg right now, so maybe they can move some guys around in the outfield. Maybe Brandon Nimmo can go out to center field, and Trout could play a corner outfield spot. You can share some time at DH, whatever it may be. Could you imagine this lineup with Lindor, Soto, Alonso, Trout? My goodness, that's just ridiculous, but that is a lot of money on the payroll. Would the Mets want to take on this much more money, especially after signing Juan Soto to the richest contract in Major League Baseball history? So when it comes to this hot take, I think I got to give it a bust. I think in the end, it's just going to be too hard to move him with all the money that he's owed. I think it's more likely he gets moved in the offseason. You got more time to figure out the financial side of things. I think if he does get traded, I think it needs to be in the next year or two. He's about to turn 34 years old. He's only getting older at this point. The injury risk is only going to get up there. So this season, I just don't see him getting moved. Maybe in the offseason, though. But to be honest, I think there's more of a chance that the Angels never trade him. I think there's just too much working against them at this point to pull off a trade. But like I always say never. Up next, I'm going to do a 2-for-1 involving Sandy Alcantara. Over on Twitter, Marcus M says the Red Sox will trade for Alcantara, and with a rotation of Crochet, Alcantara, Buehler, Bayo, Houck, or Giolito, they'll have a monstrous second half and win the AL East. And over in the YouTube community, JackHat8070 says Cubs trade for Sandy Alcantara for a package starting with James Triantos. Now, I definitely think Alcantara is going to get moved by the deadline this year, coming back from Tommy John, so he's still trying to figure things out a little bit. He's gotten rocked in his last couple of starts against the Phillies and the Nationals, but we all know how good this guy can be. One of the top pitchers in the game when healthy. Gets a ton of ground balls, good velo, good stuff. Love me some Sandy Alcantara. Now, I love both of these ideas. Now, when it comes to the Red Sox, making a big trade for Garrett Crochet in the offseason, and that's because they've really beefed up the farm over the last few years here, and they still have more prospects they could deal if they wanted to go that route. So maybe you could do some kind of a combination here where someone like Wilyer or Abreu could be the centerpiece, where, Roman Anthony, he's banging on the door to the major leagues right now. He's tearing it up in AAA, one of the top prospects in all of baseball. So, could there be a scenario where the Red Sox want to make room for him and they use Wilyer as a trade chip to land someone? We got Franklin Arias. He's the number 4 prospect in their system as of right now. Had a breakout season last year in the minor leagues. I could definitely see him being a trade chip because you already got Trevor Story at the major league level. Marcelo Meyer is knocking on the door. So I could see him being used in a trade. Got a few other guys here. Someone like Yoelan Cespedes. You got Miguel Blaze. They got high ceilings. Even someone like Mikey Romero. He's off to a pretty solid start this year. Had himself a very good season last year. You got guys like David Sandlin, Garcia here at number 6. So the Red Sox do have guys that they could use in a trade. But after the Garrett Crochet trade this past offseason, I'm not sure if they would unload this many prospects yet again. I actually like the idea of the Chicago Cubs a lot more, especially after losing Justin Steele for the entire season, having to get elbow surgery. I think Alcantara would be a great fit with the Cubs. And the Marlins, over the last year or so, they've been looking for high upside bats, and the Cubs have a ton of those. James Triantos could definitely be a guy used here. I got other guys here like Kevin Alcantara, Owen Casey, Moises Ballesteros. You got Jefferson Rojas. All of these guys are in their top 10 as of right now, and a few of these guys are in the top 100 overall. If I were to give a boom or a bust for each of these, I'll say bust for the Red Sox, but for the Cubs, I'm going to give it a boom. And I want to mention a few other teams here as well that could absolutely get into the mix for Alcantara. I think the Orioles would be prime candidates. I mean, look at all the injuries they have right now. I think the Orioles really need to make a play here for Alcantara. I mean, this rotation is looking a little weak, if you ask me. I think the Padres could be interesting. They're off to a hot start this year. And, AJ Preller seems to always find a way to get deals done. The Rangers, who knows what the rotation is going to be looking like health-wise. DeGrom is always going to be a bit of a health risk. Eovaldi, he's had some issues in the past as well. The Yankees lost Garrett Cole for the year. You always got to look out for the Dodgers. They have a ton of injuries right now and a lot of injury risk in the rotation. They have a ton of prospects they could deal. So there's definitely going to be a lot of other teams in the mix here too. I'm going to get back to another trade in just a little bit. For the next one, I'm going to focus on a couple of players, a couple of first basemen that are absolutely raking right now. First up, we got Lito Stromboli from the YouTube community saying Spencer Torkelson starts in the All-Star game. And we got another one here from B-Trax19. Tyler Soderstrom is an All-Star with 40-plus homers. Let's start off with Torkelson. We all know how hyped this guy was coming out of the 2020 draft. He was looking like one of the next prolific hitters in Major League Baseball. He was crushing it at Arizona State. He was getting comparisons to Mike Trout. Since coming to the Major League level, he has not been able to find a way to stay consistent. consistent. Sure, had over 30 homers a couple of years ago, but last year it all came crashing down. He got sent back down to the minor leagues. Everything was off with him, but this past offseason, he reworked some of the mechanics a little bit, getting more into his legs. He's looking a bit more fluid at the plate, and it's paying off big time. Over 20 games, hitting 288 with a 386 on base, a 630 on the slugging, a 188 WRC plus, 6 homers. This is the best we've seen Torkelson up to this point, and I think the advanced metrics suggest that this new and improved Torkelson is here to stay. Take a look at the expected numbers here, looking fantastic. Batted ball profile looking great. I think he could clean up some of the plate discipline. This is the best we've seen Torkelson up to this point, but he's going to have some competition in the American League. Tyler Soderstrom, who was also drafted in the first round back in 2020. Oh my goodness, this guy is off to a red-hot start. 20 games, hitting .325, a 384 on base, a 701 slugging, a 212 WRC plus, 9 homers for crying out loud. And take a look at the metrics with him. I mean, he's also got a ton of reds here. Expected numbers, batted ball profile, looking great. In the American League, I think it's pretty tight right now. Soderstrom is ahead right now with a 1.2 F4, and Torkelson is right behind him with a 1.1. Now, when it comes down to these guys, for the voting, you got to remember with the All-Star Game voting, the fans pick who the starter is going to be. I wonder, Torkelson, I think it's fair to say, is a name that people have heard of a little bit more, right? Very hyped coming out of that draft in 2020. Soderstrom, he's definitely a name that people have heard of. Now, at the time of the voting, if it's close, I wonder if Torkelson is going to have a bit of an edge. No disrespect to Soderstrom. I'm just saying I think people have heard of Torkelson a little bit more, and with the bounce back season that he's having, I just wonder if the popularity is going to give him a bit of an edge. Now, if it comes down to it where Soderstrom has the better numbers, then yeah, obviously he would be the guy that should get voted for the first base job in the All-Star Game. But if you were to ask me who my money is on right now when it comes to who's going to be starting in the All-Star Game, I think it's got to be Torkelson. Now, again, if Soderstrom has the better numbers, he should be the starter. Up next, we got Jimmy on Twitter. He says, Ben Rice finishes top 10 in MVP voting. How about Ben freaking Rice to start off the year? My goodness, 18 games, hitting 297, a 392 on base, a 609 on the slugging, a 187 WRC plus, 5 homers. The DH spot is looking like it's going to be his to lose. You don't even know if Giancarlo Stanton's going to be coming back this year. Taking a look at the advanced metrics from last year, we did see some signs of this to come here. The expected WOBA was looking good. The expected slugging was looking good. The barrel rate was very good last year, 15.6%. He wasn't really chasing outside the zone. He was drawing a good amount of walks. And take a look at what we got so far here in 2025. My goodness, he got reds all over the place right now. When you take a look at the MVP voting from last year, the guy that finished 10th overall was Brent Rooker. He had himself an excellent season last year, 39 homers, a 927 OPS. So could Ben Rice, get into that territory a little bit? Hey, with that lefty swing, with the pop he's got at Yankee Stadium, why couldn't this guy hit over 30 home runs? Now, when it comes to finishing top 10, I'm not so sure. I think it's still a little too early to say. You got some other guys here that were in the top 10 last year, like Jose Ramirez, Gunnar Henderson. They're still looking to wake up a little bit more. Of course, you're going to have Bobby Witt Jr., Aaron Judge. They're probably going to be leading the pack here. Don't forget about Vlad Jr. You got a couple other guys that can maybe step up, like Corey Seager. He's off to a good start this year. Like guys like Alex Bregman, Trevor Story, they're off to good starts for the Red Sox. So let's see, is he going to be able to do enough to get into the top 10? I think that could be really fun. I'd love to see when young players emerge like this. For now, I'll go with a bust. Just because you don't fully have that track record, but I would love to say a boom. I think he could have a chance at the top 15, but hey, if he keeps hitting like this, he absolutely could finish in the top 10. Jung Lee finishes top 3 in MVP voting, and the Giants finished first in the West. How about Jung Lee to start things off? I was very sad when his season ended early last year after a shoulder injury, but this is a guy I was high on for this year, a guy that makes a ton of contact, doesn't really strike out. I think his bat fits perfectly at Oracle. Yes, a spacious park, and you're thinking, well, he doesn't really have a lot of power. How does that fit very well? That's a guy that can hit into the gaps a lot. He can get a lot of base hits, especially with the spacious outfield out there, and he'll bring you a little pop along the way. I could see him finishing with around 15 homers. Now, he's off to a very good start this year. When it comes to Fangraph wins above replacement, he currently ranks 5th overall in the National League, hitting .361 with a .420 on base, a .653 on the slugging, a .196 WRC plus, 3 homers, 3 stolen bases. I think Jung Lee is just a very dynamic player, a guy that's going to get a ton of hits. He's going to get on base. He's not really going to strike out all that much. Will he finish top 3 in MVP voting in the National League? Well, I'm not so sure about that. Shohei Ohtani is going to be in the mix. Mookie Betts on the Dodgers as well. Corbin Carroll's off to a great start this year. Fernando Tatis Jr. Pete Alonso's off to a great start. So I think Jung Lee is going to be a very good player this year. I don't think it's going to be enough to be top 3 in MVP voting. I could see top 10. Now for the Giants, first place in the National League West, I don't know about that. I think the Dodgers are just too strong, but I love what the Giants are doing so far. They got a lot of players I just like on this team. You got some solid starting pitching. You got some decent bats in the lineup, especially now that you have Willy Adames in there. I like this Giants team. I do hope they go after a wild card spot this year. And last but not least, we got a crazy one from Charlie Draper on Twitter. He says, Paul Skenes will get traded to the Baltimore Orioles, and the Pirates will receive a massive package for him, which includes Kobe Mayo, Jackson Holliday, and or Grayson Rodriguez, among other young, talented prospects. Now, I'm going to give this a bust right off the bat. But I love the craziness of it. My goodness. I mean, when you think about it, when you take a look at the needs for both teams, the Orioles, they could definitely use some starting pitching, and someone like Paul Skenes is exactly the kind of guy they need. And for the Pirates, their offense just stinks. They could definitely use more bats. So I think the thinking behind it makes sense, but it's just never going to happen. The Pirates would be insane to trade Paul Skenes at this point. Off to another great start this year. He looked phenomenal last year in his rookie season. When it comes to a possible trade package, right? If the Orioles were willing to part with someone like Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo, throw a couple more guys in there. I don't know, maybe someone like Samuel Basayo could be in the mix. Maybe, Heston Kjerstad, whatever it may be. And I think for the Pirates, that would be amazing. But there's just no reason to trade Paul Skenes at this point. But then I could see the argument for, maybe even thinking about it, because the Pirates, are they going to sign this guy to a long-term deal? Would Paul Skenes even be open to a long-term extension at this point? I just don't see them being able to come to an agreement on an extension. But I think for the Pirates, they would like to take advantage of this window that they have. Try and get that offense going a little bit. Try and develop some of these guys down at the minor league level that can contribute to the lineup at the major league level. And maybe they can make a run here in the next few years. Paul Skenes still only 22 years old. He's got 5 more seasons, including this year, of control. Maybe, when they get a couple of years away from his free agency, maybe that's when some talks could come up. We'll see. But I don't see this happening. I don't see the Pirates trading him at all. I think that would be bonkers. But I love the craziness of it. It would be amazing. This would be like a Luka kind of a trade, one that just absolutely blows your mind. You're thinking if someone puts this on Twitter, you're thinking they get hacked. But again, there's no way the Pirates will trade Paul Skenes, at least as of right now. But everyone, those are the hot takes that I decided to talk about today. Make sure you're on the lookout for them in the future. I usually post on X and in the YouTube community to give me your hot takes. So always keep an eye out. But everybody, that's all I got for right now. If you can on the way out, hit that like button, subscribe again if you're new, and I'll talk to you next time.